I thought she was teaching lessons in literature, but the truth is, she was the lesson my heart couldn't stop learning. The classroom was alive with the usual hum of voices, the shuffle of papers, the impatient tapping of pens against wooden desks. Yet for me, none of it registered. My attention kept circling back to her. She wasn't just another teacher going through the motions of a lesson, there was something about the way she carried herself that demanded more than listening. It demanded presence. She stood at the front, chalk dust softening the lines of the board behind her, her blouse neatly pressed, the sleeves rolled just enough to reveal graceful wrists that moved with deliberate ease as she wrote. There was no rush in her gestures, no wasted energy, only calm, practiced precision, as though she had long ago mastered the art of patience. When she spoke, the room shifted. Her voice was steady, warm, with a richness that filled every corner of the space. It wasn't just knowledge she gave, it was reassurance. And while the others scribbled notes or stared blankly, I found myself tracing the rise and fall of her words, not for their meaning, but for the way they seemed to carry an intimacy meant only for me. I tried to focus, tried to anchor my mind on the pages of my notebook, but each time I glanced up, I caught details that unsettled me. The faint line of concentration between her brows. The way her hair, pinned neatly at the back, loosened strands that framed her face when she leaned forward. The subtle curve of a smile when a student answered correctly. These details clung to me more stubbornly than the lesson itself. A quiet war waged inside me, part of me urged discipline, insisting she was my teacher, distant and untouchable. Yet the other part, louder and more reckless, leaned into the strange gravity she seemed to pull me with. The air carried the faint scent of chalk, layered with something softer, something unmistakably hers, perfume that lingered near the front row. And though I sat farther back, I imagined I could feel it threading its way toward me, teasing me with the illusion of closeness. Every so often, her eyes swept across the class, pausing on faces for only a breath. But when they touched mine, something different happened. She didn't hold the gaze long, but in those fleeting seconds, the world went still. My chest tightened, my hand froze over my pen, and I wondered if she could see it, the distraction she had unknowingly become. And in that silence, surrounded by the noise of students and the steady rhythm of her lesson, I realized this wasn't about what she was teaching. It was about the quiet pull she had on me, the unspoken lesson written not on the board, but somewhere deeper, etched into every heartbeat that echoed louder whenever her eyes found mine. The end of class always carried a certain relief for everyone else, books slamming shut, chairs scraping, voices rising as the students filed out. But for me, relief never came. Not when she was still there. I lingered, gathering my things slower than necessary, letting the crowd thin until it was only her and me in the quiet, fading light of the afternoon. She was erasing the board, each sweep of her hand sending small clouds of chalk dust into the air. The movement was graceful, unhurried, yet there was a firmness to it that mirrored her presence. I thought I could slip away unnoticed, but before I reached the door, her voice stopped me. "You're distracted." I froze, the words hanging in the stillness like a bell that refused to stop ringing. When I turned, she wasn't looking at the board anymore. Her eyes were on me, steady, curious, but not unkind. There was no reprimand in her tone, only an observation. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the tightness in my chest. Her arms crossed lightly, the gesture casual but carrying a weight of authority. The soft fabric of her blouse pulled gently against her shoulders as she leaned against the desk, waiting for me to respond. I could have lied. I could have blamed the long day, or the noise from the hallway, or even the heavy air of late afternoon pressing against the windows. But I didn't. Instead, the truth slipped out, quiet but unshaken. Because you're the lesson. For a heartbeat, silence thickened between us. Her expression shifted, subtle but undeniable, her brows lifting slightly, lips parting as though the words had unsettled her balance. A faint color rose to her cheeks, but she quickly masked it with composure. Her perfume reached me then, soft and elegant, the kind that lingered without announcing itself. My palms were warm against the strap of my bag, my pulse quick in my throat. She tilted her head just enough to study me, as though weighing the sincerity behind my words. "Do you know what you're saying?" she asked, her voice softer now, carrying a note of hesitation. I nodded, though the courage in me trembled. "I know. And I mean it." The air seemed charged, as if even the dust motes caught in the golden light had paused to listen. She exhaled slowly, her gaze flickering away and then back, torn between the role she carried and the human beneath it. And in that moment, I understood, my words had crossed a line. Not of disrespect, but of honesty. The kind that couldn't be unsaid. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she lowered her arms and rested her hands on the edge of the desk, her fingers tapping softly against the wood. It was a small gesture, but it betrayed something, nervousness, maybe, or simply a weight of thoughts she couldn't voice. I stood there, rooted, watching her wrestle with silence. Finally, she spoke. "Why would you say something like that?" Her tone wasn't sharp, but there was a fragility in it, a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. It wasn't the voice of a teacher maintaining distance, it was the voice of a woman confronted with a truth she hadn't expected. I stepped closer, not too close, but enough to feel the change in the air between us. The late afternoon sun cut across the windows, laying stripes of light and shadow across her face. For a moment, she looked younger, softened by the glow, though the wisdom in her eyes remained. "Because it's true," I said quietly. "Every time you stand there, it's not just about the subject. It's the way you carry yourself. The patience in your voice, the calm in your movements. You make me feel like, paying attention to you is the real lesson." Her lips pressed together, not in disapproval, but in thought. She exhaled, and I caught the faintest trace of her perfume again, mingling with chalk dust and the wooden scent of the desks. My words had landed somewhere deep, though she tried to shield it with composure. "You're too young to mean that," she murmured, shaking her head lightly. But her eyes betrayed her. They didn't dismiss me. If anything, they searched me, testing if I was only playing a game or if I truly understood what I was saying. I held her gaze, steady despite the tremor in my chest. Age doesn't change how someone makes you feel. For the first time, she looked away, not out of indifference, but out of conflict. Her hand lifted as though she might brush a loose strand of hair from her face, but instead it lingered near her cheek, a small shield between us. The silence stretched, heavy but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that asked questions neither of us dared to answer out loud. I could feel the distance between who she was supposed to be and who she was in this moment collapsing, inch by inch. She straightened finally, reclaiming her authority, though her voice was softer than before. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, though the hesitation in her words told me she wasn't only warning me, she was warning herself. And that was the moment I knew, whatever line existed between us had already begun to blur. The corridors after class always felt different, emptier, quieter, as though the building itself exhaled once the last of the voices faded away. That day, I lingered again, and she did too. She had a stack of books and papers balanced against her hip, shifting them carefully as she locked the classroom door behind us. "Let me carry those," I offered, stepping forward before I could second-guess myself. She gave me a look, half amused, half cautious, but after a moment, she handed them over. The weight surprised me, heavier than I expected, and I held them against my chest as we walked side by side down the hall. Our footsteps echoed softly in the stillness. Outside, the sky had turned to the muted gold of early evening, painting the windows with fading light. The fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzed faintly, but it was the sound of her breathing, close and steady, that filled my awareness more than anything else. "You don't have to stay behind," she said after a while, her voice carrying a measured distance. "I manage fine on my own." "I know," I replied, glancing at her. "But maybe I just wanted the excuse." She didn't answer, but the faintest curve tugged at the corner of her lips, gone almost before I could be sure I'd seen it. Her hands brushed against mine briefly as we shifted the stack between us to fit through a narrow doorway. The contact was accidental, fleeting, yet it lit something sharp and alive in my chest. Her hand was warm, steady, graceful, and when it touched mine, even for that heartbeat of a second, I felt it linger longer in memory than in reality. She must have felt it too, because she drew back quickly, adjusting the strap of her bag as if needing something to occupy her hands. "Thank you," she said softly, her tone different now, gentler, almost unsure. I nodded, clutching the books a little tighter. "Anytime." The hallway stretched before us, empty, but every step seemed to narrow the space between us. When she glanced up at me, her eyes caught mine and held them a beat too long before she turned her gaze away. That tiny hesitation told me more than any words could. Beneath her composure, beneath her careful control, there was something stirring, something she didn't want to admit but couldn't quite hide. By the time we reached her office door, the weight of the books felt like nothing. What I carried was heavier, the awareness that this quiet, ordinary moment was no longer ordinary at all. The library was nearly empty that evening. Only a few students lingered between the tall shelves, their whispers lost under the quiet hum of the old air vents. I hadn't expected to see her there, yet when I turned down the far aisle, there she was, standing with a book in her hands, her posture elegant in the muted glow of the lamps. She noticed me almost instantly. Her eyes lifted from the page, surprise flashing across them before she softened, tucking a strand of hair neatly behind her ear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was too thick, too charged to be casual. "You're here late," she said finally, her voice quiet, as though mindful of the silence around us. "So are you," I replied, stepping closer. My words felt heavier in the stillness, carrying more meaning than they should. She closed the book slowly, holding it against her chest like a shield. "You know," she began, her tone measured, "what you said the other day, it's not something to take lightly." I nodded, my chest tightening. "I know. But I wasn't joking, if that's what you're asking." Her eyes searched mine, testing me, as if waiting for some sign that I'd laugh it off or pull back. But I didn't. I let her see it, the sincerity I couldn't bury. "You're a student," she whispered, lowering her gaze. "And I'm supposed to be your teacher. There are rules, expectations. People wouldn't understand." Her words were firm, yet her voice trembled faintly, betraying the conflict inside her. I stepped closer, careful, slow enough for her to turn away if she wished. She didn't. "I don't care what people think," I said, my voice barely louder than the rustle of the pages nearby. "All I know is that every time I see you, I feel something I can't ignore. And I don't want to pretend anymore." She drew in a breath, sharp and quick, as though my words had stolen the air between us. Her hands tightened around the book, knuckles pale, but her eyes met mine with a fire I hadn't seen before. A fire she was trying to smother. The library around us seemed to vanish, the scent of paper, the soft flicker of the lamps, the distant footsteps, all fading into the background. In that fragile bubble of silence, it was just her and me, two people standing too close to be strangers, too far to be anything else. She exhaled slowly, her voice breaking into a whisper. "You don't know how dangerous it is to say that." I leaned in, close enough to catch the warmth of her breath. "Maybe," I murmured. "But sometimes the truth is worth the risk." She turned sharply, as if to end the conversation before it went any further. The book pressed against her chest, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor as she made for the aisle. For a moment, I thought I had lost her, that she would retreat into the safety of distance, leaving me standing in the quiet weight of unsaid words. But something inside me wouldn't let her walk away. Not like this. Before I could second-guess myself, I reached out. My fingers found her wrist, not tight, not pulling her back, only a light, trembling touch. Just enough to ask her to stop. She froze. The silence that followed was deafening. I felt the warmth of her skin beneath my hand, the steady thrum of her pulse beneath my fingertips. It wasn't a grasp of possession, it was a plea, a fragile connection in a moment when words had failed. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, wide with surprise, and for an instant I worried I'd gone too far. But she didn't pull away. She stayed, caught between the instinct to leave and the gravity pulling her closer. Her lips parted slightly, as if she meant to say something, but no sound came. Instead, her breath brushed the still air between us, soft and uneven. My own heartbeat was a drum in my chest, each beat echoing in the silence of the empty library. My voice broke softer than I intended. "I needed you to look at me." Her gaze lowered briefly to where my hand rested against her wrist. My fingers barely touched her, but I knew she felt it as keenly as I did. Her lashes trembled as she blinked, and when she raised her eyes again, there was no denial in them, only a storm of emotion she could no longer mask. For the first time, she didn't hide. Her breath deepened, her shoulders lifted, and she let the moment linger. The rules, the roles, the distance, none of it existed here, in this fragile stillness where her heart beat against mine through the smallest of touches. She whispered, almost to herself, "You don't understand what you're asking." I shook my head slowly. "Maybe not. But I understand how this feels. And then, though she could have stepped back, though she could have broken the connection, she didn't. She let me hold her there, in that fragile space where silence spoke louder than any lesson ever could. The air around us felt impossibly still, as though the world itself had paused to witness the moment. My hand remained lightly against her wrist, and though every instinct told me to let go, I couldn't, not yet. Not when her eyes, full of hesitation and something deeper, refused to look away. Finally, she drew in a long breath. Her shoulders lowered, the tension easing just slightly. "You shouldn't," she began, her voice quiet, unsure. But then she stopped, as though the rest of the sentence had dissolved before it reached her lips. I loosened my touch, not releasing her, only softening it. "I know what I shouldn't," I admitted. "But you're the one I can't stop learning from. You're not just teaching the subject. You're teaching me something about myself. About what it feels like to really see someone." Her expression wavered. A smile ghosted at the edges of her lips, not playful, not careless, but sad and tender, as if I'd uncovered something she'd hidden away for far too long. She turned her hand slightly, just enough so her fingers brushed against mine. It was the smallest movement, but it felt like an entire wall crumbling between us. "You make me sound like I'm more than I am," she whispered. I shook my head gently. "No. You make me realize you're more than I thought anyone could be." For a long moment, there were no rules, no titles. Just two people standing too close in the quiet glow of the library lamps, the patter of rain beginning against the tall windows outside. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling as though trying to memorize the feeling, before opening them again with a softness that hadn't been there before. "You've taught me something too," she said, her voice steady now, low but warm. "That being seen, as a woman, not just a teacher, still matters." I'd forgotten that. We sank into the silence together, side by side now at one of the long wooden tables. My hand slipped gently over hers where it rested on the surface. She didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed the contact, her thumb brushing ever so lightly across my knuckles. Outside, the rain deepened, filling the space with a rhythm that felt protective, enclosing us in our own small world. Neither of us spoke again, we didn't need to. Our eyes said everything, the gratitude, the hesitation, the quiet joy of being understood. And as I sat there with her, I realized the truth I'd spoken before wasn't just a line. She wasn't a distraction. She was the lesson. The one I'd carry with me long after the books were closed.